l'ami Yante. This is, as you know, the podcast of Christelle, Nadia, Fotso. Last week, I took a strategic break. There is a lot going on. I've talked to you since the beginning of season 2 of the fact that I took my case to the United Nations and to the African Union because this case is first and foremost about a crime, something illegal happened here. The only reason why you haven't heard about it, why what happened, is not in every newspaper in the United States, in Europe, or in Africa and elsewhere, is because we are talking about African wealth. So the people that I am accusing here weaponize my disability, thinking that they could do it because of my Africanness. I told you about the banks. There are 7 banks now. Barclays, HSBC, JP Morgan Chase, Bank Freak, GT Bank, LLB, and Société Générale. Those are the banks involved in this case. 2 weeks ago, I wrote a formal complaint that I made public on my Substack, fotso.substack.com. Please subscribe to the financial regulators. Those banks have admitted that they have my dad's assets. They haven't questioned my legal standing. Yet they are doing something that is not just despicable. They are weaponizing my disability, procedural barriers, to make it extremely difficult for me to have access to my inheritance. This Wednesday, I wrote a letter that I made public to the head of the Financial Conduct Authority of the UK, the United Kingdom, Nikhil Rathi, asking him to resign. The FCA in the UK is the organization supposed to make sure that the banks follow the law and don't do what HSBC and Barclays don't do what they're doing in this case. I sent an email, a personal email to Nikhil Rathi, the CEO of the UK FCA, tell him about this case and tell him that I was available to discuss the matter and that if he needed the evidence, it was available. My expectation was not that the FCA, Nikhil Rathi, would take me at my word. My expectation was that they were going to take this matter seriously, investigate, and then make their own independent judgment. As a lawyer, Miente, I do not expect financial regulators in the UK, in Liechtenstein, in Switzerland, in France, or in the United States to just say, because this complainant says that this happened, it happened. No, I expect them to take the matter seriously because this is serious. Banks, once again, have admitted that they have Victor Fotso's assets, an African legend. He died over 5 years ago. And the banks, they have done all that they could not to disclose, weaponizing my disability so that I never get access to my inheritance. The FCA staff questioned whether my dad was dead. They did that knowing full well my credentials. American trained lawyer. I am not saying that it makes me special. I am saying that when a lawyer writes to the UK FCA and says, this is what is happening, and that the response of the staff under Nikhil Rathi supervision is to say, you're the victim of a scam. Make sure that your dad is dead. That tells you everything that you need to know about how they give you African wealth. All they needed to do is to Google my dad's name, a public figure. But the chairman of the FCA has his staff tell you that you're the victim of a scam. Make sure that your dad is really dead. Staff members write such response to a serious complaint without ever asking for evidence. If I were a non-African saying that my dad's assets worth billions of euros are held by institutions illegally. Can you imagine that? Miente, it's because it is not imaginable in any other case than the one of an African disabled heir that I'm asking for the chairman of the UK Financial Conduct Authority to resign. Gaslighting. Saying to a disabled African woman that they don't even believe can be a lawyer. You've been scammed. You're probably not talking to the banks. Are you sure your dad is dead? My dad has been dead for over 5 years. He's a public figure. All they had to do was to Google it. Their answer was prejudiced and lazy. That is why I asked this morning, this October 22nd, 2025, for Nikhil Rathi to resign. I have never asked for preferential treatment. Never. I have never said people should believe me without evidence. I have said one thing. I shouldn't be treated differently because this is about African wealth. Because I'm disabled. And because people think that then they can make assumptions, be lazy, don't have to believe the evidence. You don't even have to ask for it. This matters. London is one of the centers of international finance, as is Geneva. What does that tell you about the way they view Africans? Question whether the UN case exists. And going even further, question whether Mr Fotso, who has been dead for 5 years, who is an African legend, was even dead. That from a serious institution like the FCA is a problem. It's unacceptable. It makes them lose all credibility. And the only way to repair that is for Nikhil Rathi to resign. It is not personal. It is not because my feelings were hurt. It is because, again, disability matters, race matters, diversity matters. And when you have those factors in the case, you need to be very, very careful. Not to give preferential treatment, but equal treatment. Equality under the law matters. So, Miante, that is what I wanted to talk to you in this week episode. This case, you should always remember, tells you everything about how difficult it is for African wealth to be passed from one generation to the next. Victor Fotso, Victor, he did the right thing. And the banks are obstructing, keeping the wealth illegally, and financial regulators, which are supposed to stop them, at least in the case of the UK Financial Conduct Authority, are doing all that they can, not just to be complicit, but to ignore the matter. Institutional gaslighting. And that's why I've asked the head of the UK FCA to resign, because in 2025, that is unacceptable. Africa is not their playground. Africans are not people that can just despise, and we don't have to take it seriously. Please subscribe to my newsletter where I post all documents about this case in French and in English, fotso.substack.com. Of course, subscribe to the podcast, and I will see you next week for another episode in English on Wednesday. No justice, no peace. On reste ensemble.